Welcome, Jeremy. Today we have some questions for you since you are a race director and former runner of Beach to Battleship, one of my favorite races.
Oh, yeah. Love that race.
Yes, I did too, very much. I hate to see it go.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. But, things happen sometimes that are just for the best in the long run, but in the short term, it's not a good place for us. But it ultimately worked out very, very well for the YMCA. So.
Well, as long as the YMCA benefits. Do you guys have any desire to ever bring back a full? Because I read the non-compete expired in 2018. You could bring one back. I mean, obviously, the fall is probably the worst idea possible, but the spring is wide open for the calendar.
It's really interesting with the iron distance race. And I think what happened with Beach to Battleship is testament to the fact that timing is truly everything when it comes to the sport. And it was just a perfect time. I mean, it was just a groundswell of a lot of different things that worked out perfectly for that event. We were in a really good place triathlon wise as the industry was going. Ironman had not exploded to the level that it has now. The city of Wilmington was in a perfect spot. Our company was in a perfect spot. We were teamed with the right people. It's just a lot of things that really went well for that event, and the timing of it. It put out obviously to what eventually became the #1 iron distance event in the continental U.S. and #5 in the world. So the long, I guess, answer to get to your question is right now, no. I really have no desire to host another iron distance event. Obviously, you couple that with what's happening right now with COVID-19, and it just amplifies that no. But with that said, if we look 2-3 years down the road, we never know what the sport's going to look like. We don't know what Ironman's going to look like, and really they are the end all be all with that distance right now. We had a hard enough time getting people to separate themselves from Ironman just to come race Beach to Battleship, which has established itself over the 7 or 8 years as a powerhouse event. I mean, it was.
Yeah, you guys had a really good draw, whereas these other independent races, the independent fulls. I mean, they're full. Rev 3, Cedar Point, when I did it, it didn't even draw 200 people, and you guys were pulling what, at least 600. So,
I think at our peak we had 800 in the full, and the weird thing about a full and a half combo, and Ironman doesn't do many of those. They are probably now with COVID-19, but the weird thing about that is the half drives the budget and the numbers. But ultimately, the full is what's required to give the half that bigger feel. So we do plenty of standalone halves that we just can't replicate that big feel, even with large numbers. It's an interesting dynamic there with the multiple half and full, and the same thing is that you need the full, and a lot of marathons and half marathons see this. The half marathon is the bigger in terms of draw, and you need those numbers to help your budget, but you need the full in order to make the half feel like a bigger event than it is. So we experienced that at Beach to Battleship in a big way, and I think the hard part is really just that full getting to. We just never could get 1,000 people. I mean, no matter what we did, no matter how much we spent on advertising, no matter how great the reviews were, we never could pull 1,000 people. And then you watch an Ironman, and again, there's no part of me that would ever compare us to Ironman, and other than saying, we aspire to be as good as Ironman, and we know everything that they've done. I know personally as a triathlete who's done 2 of their events, but we just could not break that 800 number. And I don't even know, can't imagine what it would be like in today's atmosphere. I don't think we could get 400 in Wilmington right now. I just really don't.
well, at the same time, Ironman's numbers are down. I don't have the statistics, but I know it takes how long it takes to sell an event out now. And Ironman Florida doesn't sell out in 15 minutes anymore.
Yeah,
Augusta doesn't sell out in 15 minutes anymore.
No, and we had events that would sell out in minutes ourselves. The small sprints used to do that. So I think it's a testament there's two things that are happening right now, I think, in the Ironman world. And again, I'm not inside the Ironman world whatsoever. So this is strictly me looking within the sport, but from outside of their corporate structure. But the sport and the industry itself is, one, saturated with events. And I think what we're seeing right now with COVID-19 is going to kind of level that market back out when things kind of return to semi-normal state. You know, the number of events just went crazy, and anyone was putting on a triathlon as if it was a local 5K, and getting 80 people, 90 people at some of these events. And if they're a nonprofit who can make $4,000 or $5,000 doing that, then they were super happy. And that's going to go away. So that's going to help level the sport out. The other thing that's happening is Ironman just saturated their market, I feel like, with, you know, kind of, and again, I'm not in this world, but I would imagine when you have a venture capitalist company come in and buy you and want to then turn around and sell that and make a profit off of it, what you're really working towards is number of events, because number of events, in theory, equals more eyes on your business. It equals more participants overall. It equals more sponsor dollars. And I think that's what happened. And I think it ultimately has hurt Ironman. Maybe not the bottom line. Maybe they're worth way more than they were. I don't know. But I just know from a sport standpoint and watching, as you said, their numbers and their sellout rate. But ultimately, I don't think they care. I mean, if they sell out on day one versus day 364, I mean, ultimately it's the same for them, you know.
Well, I think that does matter, because if you sell it on day one, you're going to be looking for that other race. You know, if you sell out on day 364, that means you never look for that other race.
I think, yeah, I think you're right in that. And if you look at them in terms of a broad conglomerate of all these different events. So if Ironman Florida sells out, I think from a standpoint of the individual races, yeah, it doesn't matter. But I think you are right in that the overall idea of creating that, you know, kind of frenzy to get into different events, that does matter. And that does kind of make a statement to the general triathlon world that, yeah, I mean, I can get into Florida anytime I want. So maybe I'm not as motivated to put my dollars down. Maybe I'm not as motivated to train, and therefore maybe I don't come in and actually race because I didn't get motivated from 364 days out. So I think you are right. That's a good point.
And I think they hurt themselves too, because everything is so backloaded. It is from like September, you know, August on, because the first half of the season is very weak, and, you know, people want to race as much as possible. That's why I thought if you brought back a race, it would do great in May.
No, we tried that with Mountains to Main Street. You know, the problem that we have right now in being an independent, non-Ironman race directing company is, one, we don't come out of the gate, even with Beach to Battleship and the success we had there, even with literally thousands of triathlons being produced. The triathlon market just does not, you know, give the benefit of the doubt to new events. And, you know, I look back to Beach to Battleship, and we've done several other things to try to replicate that, and we couldn't. Even in Key West with Bone Island, we tried the exact same thing there in what has to be the premier racing location. And granted, a lot of things there, January timeframe for a full and a half, even though it was beautiful, not a lot of people were able to train for that. And I think that's what we see with those spring events is, at least prior to this virtual indoor training thing where everybody seems to be putting in massive miles early in the season now because they have nothing else to do. People just aren't ready, that we're finding. And again, I don't know if that's people aren't ready or if the market is kind of skeptical of first year events, you know. So I don't know. We tried in a big way with Mountains to Main Street, and it had its own challenges. But
yeah, and Oconee, man, I did that last year. I think there were like 60 to 80 people in it. And I don't like you for that. It's a very humbling course. When I mapped it out at first, it said 2,500 feet of elevation gain. And at the end, when I looked at my Strava, it said 4,000. I'm like, that sounds a lot more like it.
Yeah, I think 2,500 feet was on the swim.
It was a humbling course.
Yeah, and you know, the thing is, as a race director, we kind of are pushed into places like that these days. And unless you're able to tap into a really big downtown market who's willing to give you the space, it's really hard. You know, we started that event, Oconee Man last year. What we started as Mountains to Main Street, and it was a point-to-point event. And so with Beach to Battleship, back then there weren't a lot of point-to-point long distance events. And we kind of proved that that was possible at Beach to Battleship. And I think we said, okay, this is possible. We can make this happen. And now let's look at some different ways and places that we can do this, because with a point-to-point, you can get a lot more creative, and you can see a lot of places that you wouldn't normally be able to see. So a triathlon in downtown Greenville is not a possibility. You can't swim in the Rudy River. Triathlon in downtown Atlanta is not a possibility. Unless you're going to swim in a pool or a city pond of some sort, this is not going to pass any regulations. For the point-to-point, all of a sudden, we could do an iron distance race in downtown Atlanta if we wanted to. You swim in a lake that's 50 miles away and you bike in. The problem is,
that's about right, because
it's you're 50 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And we ran into that with Mountains to Main Street. Beach to Battleship was a little different. It was 10 miles away. And we went out into the country and that. But Mountains to Main Street was that idea. And we finished in downtown Greenville, and it was awesome. The problem is it's 50 miles from downtown Greenville to where we were with Mountains to Main Street. And the logistics of that are just too challenging for athletes. And so that's the other piece of Beach to Battleship that was just kind of perfect is there is no swimmable water in downtown Wilmington, but only 10 miles away is the ocean. And, I don't know, just having the connections that we had in Wilmington with Bill Scott, who started the company, living there for, half of his life or more. I just don't know that those kind of connections are possible without a massive ability to draw numbers. City Council and Chambers of Commerce seeing, oh, you're going to bring in 1,000 people, we'll open up our doors to make this happen, because as you well know, a triathlon is a very disruptive event. And so with the Coney Man, the race that you're talking about, we do get pushed out into the country for things like that. But ultimately what Ironman's able to do is they're able to go into an untouchable community for someone like us. Even if we went in and said, hey, we can get you 500 people, they can say, we had a dog walking thing last week that got 1,500. So what is 500 people really doing for us? Ironman could come in and say, we can get you 4,000 people, 25 million in economic impact. And their doors open a lot quicker for them than it does for a smaller event. And, that's just the way it is. I completely understand it. So we have to find those cracks and nuances in smaller markets that really want the business that someone like Ironman might not be able to work with. And that's what we have to find right now. And so kind of circling back to that question is it would take an impressive city like a Wilmington or like a Greenville or an Atlanta to come in and say, we want to host this event and we want you to help us with it for something like that to happen again.
Well, I do think your January race for Bone Island is a lot more feasible today because Zwift has become so ubiquitous in training where I don't have to go freeze my ass off outside anymore. I could ride anytime I want, anytime, any day. Got a fan, you can go. And
yeah.
I think that's really changed the sport to where people kind of want to travel a little bit and race throughout the year. I scheduled 17 triathlons this year because I needed something to do. And I started in March and I had it all the way through December with Challenge Daytona. And I was doing on average about 2 a month, sometimes 3. And it's like,
you're the type of triathlete that we used to see all the time. And now it's a really interesting thing. 2 points that kind of come to mind when you mention that. One is talking about Zwift. And I just love the nature of kind of challenges being, and this is what a triathlete does, right? This is what any endurance sport athlete does, is you find a challenge either created on your own because you just decided this is what I want to do, Ironman, marathon, sprint, triathlon, whatever level you are, and you have this challenge in front of you, and then you go find the way to get through it. And that's where we are right now with COVID-19, is that we have this massive challenge, and every industry has it. It's not unique to the race world, but we have this challenge in front of us, and triathletes and running folks and endurance folks are finding a way to make that challenge into something that's really awesome. And that's exactly what you're pointing to, in that, we'll be able to look at events as we come out of this, and chaos kind of creates opportunity, and we'll be able to see, okay, look, people can, and people understand now that they can train through the winter and race earlier. And for someone like me and you who are in the Southeast, where that triathlon window is literally from March until mid-November or December even, it's a great thing that will come out of this. And then I've already forgotten what the second point was, which happens to me a lot, but that was one point.
Yeah, I found Bone Island a little bit too late, unfortunately.
That one.
Yeah. But, hosting it in January, I mean, that would give somebody the opportunity, like, I got a winter full, I got a late spring full, I got a fall full. I can do 3 fulls in a year. And the fact that we are definitely in a recession now, Bone Island doesn't cost as much as an Ironman. Even if you add up the cost of the hotels and everything, Ironman, and Bone Island doesn't require me to be there for 3 days if I don't want to be.
Right, but it's the key, so why wouldn't you want to be? Right?
So I might actually want to be there. But I don't want to be in Cambridge, Maryland for 3 days. I mean, when I wrote my race report about Ironman Maryland, I called it a down-and-out fishing town that Billy Joel would sing about, It's like, okay, so this is kind of it's more of a destination race, and it's at a better price, and I get to leave the cold, So maybe, it's one of those things that could, be something worth pursuing in the future, because, Beach to Battleship was almost like a flash in the pan. You haven't been able to replicate that success yet. I don't know what your partnership is. I think it's Glory Hound with Lake Logan. I mean, Lake Logan has a decent draw for an independent race. I did that last year. I mean, that last 150 yards of that swim was freezing. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's one of those things where the reason that race is even a wetsuit legal swim in August in the South is because of that creek that you have to swim into. And we made, I started that event actually with Greg at Glory Hound Events, and to this day, SetUp is still the production team. It's our North Carolina team now. We kind of back in the day kind of did some reshuffling, and they took that over and made it part of the North Carolina Triathlon Series. It's a great event, but again, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And so what we have found is that kind of the formula that works is really the exact Beach to Battleship formula. And there's a lot of pieces to that formula. It's like the quadratic equation, like the main thing, the most important thing is an accepting city and the powers that be in that city saying, hey, we want this here, and we're going to suffer through it with you, alongside you, to make sure it happens. Because what Wilmington faced was, you go out and you notify everyone that this is happening. You have the general public and the traveling public, as those folks call them. They're very, very angry all the time about disruption, and they know that, and that's just something that we deal with as race directors. And Wilmington, especially because they're in a growth phase and they're still growing, had a really difficult time with that. We shut down a lot of intersections, and you have to have that city to say, you know what, we're going to get this, and that's okay. We're going to just let people complain and let people be angry, because ultimately this is good for the city, and we'll do our best to win it. So one, that's a very big piece of that. And there's not a lot of cities like that anymore. Everybody's very, very concerned, even down to the smaller city. And actually, what's really interesting is you could probably go, and this is, I would imagine, go into a big city like in Atlanta and a New York and a really big city and find a place to put on a triathlon much more easily than somewhere like a Wilmington, because big cities are used to big events, and they know how to manage this, and they have pockets of places and other ways to get people around that just smaller cities who were built to be small and now have gotten bigger aren't ready for. And so there's a lot of pieces, but that right there seems to be the hardest one. And we had that in Mount Pleasant. Actually, we had Charleston back in the day, and they were really behind us. But eventually it just became too big. I mean, too many people down there all the time. And it just pushed us out of there. We were a nuisance. And that is kind of the way that we're going right now in the triathlon world as race directors. Is when it first came out and triathlon was new in the buzz, everybody wanted a triathlon in their town. And now it seems like that's just not the case. And
well, in the Southeast, I have one particular city in mind that can kind of handle the influx of people, is used to the nuisance, and kind of has the roads for it. But Myrtle Beach sounds like a place that, you know, is kind of used to that kind of thing.
Yeah, we tried many times. And the problem with Myrtle Beach is the conventions and size of things that come into that town are massive. Their golf
marathon,
for example, just the golf market there is massive. The normal tourism, just of people going to the beach, is massive. The conventions that come in are massive. And we even had a guy who was a Myrtle Beach local. I mean, he'd been there his whole life. His family's been there the whole life, all the ins and the outs. And eventually, you know, we had an event called, we've had several events in Myrtle Beach. We had North Myrtle Beach Triathlon. We had Trifecta. We had an event right on Ocean Boulevard in Myrtle Beach. We had the Market Common Triathlon. All of those events pretty much started as the idea of putting on a half iron distance. And what we'll do is we'll put on the smaller distance event to get up to the half and eventually a full, just to kind of get our foot in the door. They're not interested. And again, they were in talks with Ironman. I think before the purchase of Beach to Battleship, they were in talks with Myrtle Beach. And who knows, you know, if those were legitimate talks or if they were simply to kind of put a fire under the feet of us, saying, well, look, you know, Ironman's talking about coming into Myrtle Beach, and if they did that, that would be devastating to us, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. You know, I don't know the ways that works. I just know that there was legitimate talk about Myrtle Beach being an iron distance event or Ironman event along the lines of when that the Beach and Battleship thing happened.
They passed them. They did drop Chattanooga the same weekend as Rev 3 Knoxville in 2016.
I mean, it's not a bad business strategy. I mean, they're that big. And I think the thing that, you know, it's very interesting as a race director, and as I can't call myself a triathlete anymore. It's been more than 10 years, 5 years since I've done my last triathlon, so I'm no longer a triathlete. But there's two sides here. You know, as a triathlete, you know, I've raced their events and they're great and they're awesome. And the last one I did was 2006. So I don't know what the market and the world is like now, but they were great. I did Ironman New Zealand in 2004 and Ironman Florida in 2006, and they were just awesome. I mean, they do a fantastic job. And, you know, we all want to say, hey, you know, the big bad corporate company is taking away from the little guy and the mom and pops. We need to support local. But the bottom line is everybody wants to race Boston. Everybody wants to race New York. And that's what Ironman is. I mean, they're the big company in the racing world. And everybody says that as racers. But ultimately, you want to do an Ironman. And once you do, you know, 2 or 3, I don't know, maybe then you can say, well, let's go try the other guys. But ultimately, everyone's going to do an Ironman. You know, not everybody is the Susan Higgs of the world who are going to do 150 and they get to try everything. So if you're going to do that one event or that 2 event, it's probably going to be an Ironman. And as a race director, you're like kind of, man, these guys, they're the epitome, right? They're the big daddies of all triathlon, and that's who we aspire to be. And we look at what they're doing And at the same time, we go, oh, the big bad corporate company is just taking all of our triathletes and killing the sport. It's a really interesting thing to look at from both sides of that coin.
Yeah, I mean, so at first I was about the Ironman thing and the 70.3 thing. And then over the years, it started to balance out to where it was more independent races, and it's almost all independent races now. Because what I've noticed is the production value of Ironman has decreased with years. And, if I don't want to say independents don't have production value, but the price you pay for one is kind of, you get what you pay for there. I'm not getting what I paid for at Ironman. And it's like, you know what? There's a ton of these races all over the US. I even found one above the Arctic Circle, a 70.3 there. I'm like, all right, I'm down for that. I can go to all these locations and I can find something to do in these little towns. I mean, there's always something, you know what I mean? Or go to a mountains, whatever. I mean, I was in Guntersville, Alabama for Goose Pond. And I found this really cool store called, Unclaimed Baggage. All your airport luggage that gets lost. See all the weird stuff that shows up. Tons of
Oh, God, that's awesome.
everything. Yeah, jewelry, whatever you want, it's probably there. I've seen all kinds of stuff. It was interesting. But you can find something in these little towns,
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. As again, it's hard. I used to be able to talk very clearly as a triathlete versus a race director, and as I've kind of transitioned strictly to race director, I still think back to what it was like, and I think what that entails to me, just as a person, as a race director, as a former triathlete, is someone who's willing to create their own challenge and create their own adventure and kind of find the things that ultimately what you're saying is 70.3 is the distance. It's not the name of the company. That's what we have established as the challenge. That's what we've established as triathletes this is a challenging sport. And I think more and more people will come to that realization that, hey, it's all about going that distance. And one thing for us that we're seeing, hopefully, out of this COVID-19 thing is that people understand that. People understand that, an Iron virtual race is no different than a virtual race put on by SetUp events or Rev3 or Challenge, anybody like that, because there is no difference. I mean, you're creating your own challenge right outside your own door or literally within the confines of your door. So I think that is one thing that more people will start to see coming out of this, I hope.
I mean, you know what? It all boils down to the same basic elements. Beach to Battleship has and one of the same elements as, Chattanooga. Chattanooga has a couple extra things, but are those couple extra things worth that extra $100? Not really.
Yeah, and I think,
even any independent race, you've got your course, you've got your volunteers, your aid stations. The rest is just, what more do you need, right? You got timing.
Yeah, correct. And I think, and then to be honest, as someone who's done Ironman and someone who's produced non-Iron distance events, there's a polish at Ironman that is not at other events because of the budget. There's a polish that just is there. And it's no different than, the Boston Marathon or the New York City Marathon versus, say, the Mercedes Marathon in Birmingham. Ultimately,
I did that one.
Yeah, that's a great event. Val and her team do a fantastic job. And I've actually been behind the scenes of that event. And it's a big event, but there's just a polish that you can't get because of the budget. And so it's an interesting thing. And I won't deny the fact that Ironman is great and they do a great job. And when you go, there is a feel that is just different. But ultimately, that comes down to the individual. And I think for me, having done two, and I think what happened is I did New Zealand in 2004, was blown away. It's an international feel. They do a great job. Everyone there was all about the athlete. And with a massive event, as a new race director at that point, I'd been in the sport 5 years, a new triathlete, 8-9 years at that point in the sport. I actually felt important at that event. And so I was like, man, this is great. And I don't know if it was the time frame, the fact that it was New Zealand. They have a long time. It's the second oldest iron distance event in the world behind Hawaii. The race director there is fantastic, and she was just unbelievable. And then I did Florida in 2006, and I was like, I am just a cog in the machine. And again, two completely different situations. I know back then there was Ironman North America and Ironman WTC. There were different companies now, they're all one. So there's a lot of different pieces there. But I think at that point, I realized that, yeah, there's no personal feel, and that personally is, for me, what I want. I want to feel like people know me. You know, I went to New Zealand and knew 0 people racing, 0. And I felt like I was one of the most important people on the planet that day. And I went to Florida and raced with hundreds of people that I knew and felt, you know, unimportant, other than the people who were there who I knew. And so I think that was when I realized that, hey, you know, what it's all about is racing, for me at least, racing with people that you know who can encourage you, whether that's 1,000 of them or 200 of them. I think that's what we do as a race directing company, is we create that community of triathletes who know one another. We create that kind of cheers mentality. And I don't know that we can replicate that on a large scale unless we find something like a Beach to Battleship, where we invest, you know, just massive amounts of time into that again. And
social media was kind of primitive when Beach to Battleship started. You know, even towards the end there, I didn't find it through your advertising. I got it through word of mouth.
Yeah, still to this day. I mean, social media, we were partnered with a wonderful guy, Tom Crichton, for that event. He now works out in San Diego and has his own company with sponsorships, but he did our marketing and our sponsorships for that event. And that was one of the key pillars to making that event a success, in that, you know, he came up with the tagline, "Destination is the difference," from the very beginning. And that's really the difference. And that's kind of what I've looked back on all these different things is yeah, people want to race, and they want a cool race, and they want the distance and everything, but they want a great reason to be there. And Wilmington provided that. I mean, Wilmington, things about the course provided that, the fast swim. I mean, still to this day, it's just a ridiculously fast, you know, half and full swim. But the destination of Wilmington being a beach town, having a downtown feel, great restaurants and things to do, that really made the difference for that event. And the reason that some of these other events haven't taken off is probably a multitude, but that is one of them, is that we just don't have that kind of just final oomph. And Ironman's able to create that simply because they're Ironman. They can go into, I mean, they could go into anywhere. Pendleton, South Carolina, which I'm sure you've never been to.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. Right outside of Clemson. It's a great little town, but if they have a lake and a downtown setting, Ironman could come in and make it a fantastic place because it's Ironman. There's world championship slots available. Ironman brings the party to town, is the mentality. So, you know, it's just, we don't have that luxury. And so we have to create that, and it takes time and it takes word of mouth. And so with Beach to Battleship, we capped that race out in 12 days, year one, with the right marketing, but we also capped it out because we had 500 slots available. And the sport itself was yearning for more events. It was crying out for new events. And it was a time where we could put on a sprint distance race in anywhere, any town, USA. You know, we used to have a thing, if you put up a bike rack, they will come. And that was true for a very, very long time. And so, you know, we did a great job at Beach to Battleship. I mean, it's one of the things that I'm most proud of as a race director still to this day. And I can't help but feel at the same time that, you know, a big part of that success was just the timing of it. We would have been, at least year one, you know, that's the thing. We would have been a success year one simply because of the atmosphere that triathlon had. it was great marketing. It was great planning. But ultimately, we sold that event out without ever having produced a product at all. The real testament to that event is the longevity and the continued growth of it. Anyone at that point could have put on an iron distance race and a half iron distance race and gotten big numbers, relatively big numbers to start with, and then you would have watched it dwindle. And I think the thing that we're most proud of is being able to continuously make that event better. And we had 50 people on a committee who had jobs and who had lives and who met every single month for hours and put in, 10s, 20 or 30 hours on race week, just so they could help the YMCA. And I think that is another piece of that puzzle that just, I can't imagine ever having that again. And the Y was a big part of that. Those people, that committee, it's amazing. I get all the accolades still to this day about how great that event was and being the race director of that event. And ultimately, I had to calm people down. That was my job because I had so many ideas. And
it's probably one of my top 3 events if I had to think about it. I enjoyed my great time, other than I told you how my electric bus broke down and I thought this is a bad sign for today. We're sitting there for half an hour. I'm like, oh man, I don't know. And then it's freezing cold. I'm like, just get me in the water. When I got in the water, I'm like, thank you, the water's warm.
Yeah, that event was very interesting. We had a 34-degree morning one time at that event. And it's just great. But you think back on it.
It's October. It's weird. It can either be hot or it can be cold.
Yeah. And it was, I think year 1 or year 2 was absolutely miserable. And, but then it ended up being a perfect day. And so that event is near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. And to get on this interview, I literally had to, for all you know, I could still be wearing them, but I literally had to take off the Beach to Battleship pajama pants.
I have those, the orange ones.
Yeah, the orange ones, they're fantastic.
Yeah, they're somewhere in the closet.
Yeah, I wear them every day.
I gotta admit, that's the only time I've ever got pajama pants at a race. Always a shirt, and then it's the first time I got pants.
Yeah, and I think there's just so many things when you look back, but we had a committee of people who, like I said, wanted to do something different. They were triathletes, and they were almost all of them, iron distance triathletes, and they wanted something different. And everybody's got a t-shirt. And we were partnered with Tom Clifford and his company with Without Limits, and they did all the merchandising. And that's another piece of that event that there's so many little things.
Oh, the medal was cool. It was a battleship. It was like, it's not your typical circular one that Ironman does. It was a fucking battleship. I'm like, yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah, and you just look back to, and I think back to all of the things, even back to just naming of that event. There was a contest we had within the committee of just to name the event. And there was a lot of weird names that were thrown out there. And to be honest, Beach to Battleship was not my choice. I was not happy about that name because I had a different name that I won't go into because it was terrible. But it ultimately, used to end at the battleship. And so it was perfect. I'm
not going to lie, that battleship is not as picturesque as I thought it would be. It's a little bit run down.
Yeah, well, it's a 1940 something ship, an actual battleship, and they've done a decent job with it. But it was, we thought, this is great. We'll finish. We've got this great backdrop of the battleship and the finish, and it's an island that we are kind of, we can own, and that's a big thing. And again, we were a small fish in a fairly decent sized pond, and it's pretty much all we could get. But then, year 1, you finish there, and then all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, we've got 3,000 people on this island that we've got to get off. And so you're talking about moving bikes and people, and you're shuttling people with 2 water shuttles across to Wilmington, and then your Mount Mitchell style zip tying bikes to box trucks, and then you're zip tying right through carbon fiber rims that we bought several pair of rims for people. But it was just like, how did we ever pull this off? How do we get these people off of this island? And still people, They were in line for hours. You just did a half iron or an iron distance event, and you're standing in line. You're like, how did people, oh my gosh. And so after that event, we're like, well, this was great, but we completely screwed the pooch. But the thing that's great about that event is we said we screwed the pooch. We completely messed this up. It was great for a few hours, and then it was awful, and then it was fine. Once we, it's the bell curve of everything. And so year 2, we fixed it, and it was still a challenge, but we fixed it. And I think that was testament. People said, hey, look, these guys, they know what they're doing. And then by that point, we were large enough that we could say to the city of Wilmington, hey, let's finish this thing downtown. And, it was weird though, but there's so many things about race directing that are like life. And it was weird because there's so much pushback from all of us to move into downtown because we're named Beach to Battleship. Well, Beach to Battleship was just a tag that we gave ourselves because we finished at the battleship, but it also restricted us in our thinking that we can never leave the battleship. And I think, I don't remember which committee member it was, but it was a committee member. It certainly wasn't me that said, the battleship's still there. It's right there. And I think just being able to kind of pivot and adapt.
I never thought that much into it, man. Never thought that. I saw that like, okay, it's cool. It didn't matter,
We thought, and again, like you said, as an athlete, no one cares. But I think this is why that event was so great, is because we cared about every little detail. I mean, I remember one of our aid station coordinators.
I saw the battleship when I ran on that wooden plank right off in between the mile 1 and mile 2. It's like, oh, cool, battleship.
There it is. Yeah, there it is. But then, just little things like a guy on the run was making a joke at an aid station. He was late into the night, and they were asking if he needed anything, and he was like, "Man, I'd love some, peanut M&Ms." And the aid station coordinator was like, "Great." He drove to the 7-Eleven, bought like 2 things of peanut M&Ms, and the next aid station they were waiting on the guy. I was like, that's the kind of.
Well, I think with the athlete briefing you gave, you said there was a guy one year who was on the run course and he had his ID with him. So we went to a bar and had a drink and then came back out.
Yeah, that's the great part of it. It was fantastic. And that's the other thing is those pre-event meetings were just, to me, they were the highlight of that event. Just the interaction with the athletes. And I just had a lot of fun with those. And, it was great in a way to kind of move over, because we were one of the first events to move towards the end of the event into a virtual meeting because the event got so big that the Wilmington Convention Center couldn't handle all of the people in those meetings, even over 3 different meetings. So we went virtual. But those were fun. They were a lot of fun.
Yeah. And, I went through Slow Twitch's calendar of triathlons, and I counted 9 full distance ones that are happening this year or were to happen this year. And I assume that most of them, maybe half of them won't be back just because they can't afford to take this loss. And I'm assuming Ironman is going to have to trim the fat a little bit with some of their races, like Gulf Coast draws like 1,200 people or so, stuff like that. They might have to trim the fat. So even though we're going to kind of pull back in and get less races, that does open the door for new opportunities for people who are like, yeah, I still want to do this, and if you hit your timing right, you could, like Bone Island in January. Well, if it shrinks a little bit, then the calendar opens up more.
Yeah, and I think, you're right. If there is a time to look at it, it's going to be coming up soon. And I think the challenge that any race director nowadays has is we've kind of lost this, at least I have. I know I can speak for myself. There might be some younger race directors who are out there. And I think this is pretty typical as you age. It's just your aversion to risk becomes a little bit, you kind of pay attention to it more. I think back then we were a new company. We were younger and we were like, we don't have anything to lose. And I think as we get older, we do start to fall into that trap, and it's not a good place to be. I'm not saying, I'm not glorifying it, but I think we do fall into that trap of we have too much to lose, and it's a huge risk. And we've seen this play out multiple times. So it's one of those things, as you get older, you think, well, let history be your guide, and no one else has had any success like this. Challenge has done it. We did it for a brief period of time.
Rep 3, they did it for a while.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's done it for a little bit of time, but they never last. And so it's like, if we do this, if we go and put on this event and it doesn't last and we lose a whole bunch of money, no one's there to put us back together except us. And who's the silly one there? Is it us for seeing all these other people not have that success? But at the same time, there is still this yearning as a race director to want to do something great. And you're not going to accomplish that greatness, at least in one event, with a sprint or an international distance event. Really, it's going to have to be that long distance thing. And the more people that kind of keep that kind of buzzing in the back of your ear that says, hey, well, let's do this, we want this, the more likely that it is to happen. So the fact that, you know, you're interested in it is enough for me to go, well, he's probably not the only one. And you're not the only one. I can just kind of kept that buzz going just enough that it's still a possibility.
Well, here's the thing, you know, and I did a lot of homework on this because I talked to the guys at Michigan Titanium, because come hell or high water, they're always going to want to put on their full. Even if they lose money, they just love their full. But the trend seems to be that once you cancel your full, it doesn't come back. I talked to the guys who ran Redmond over in Oklahoma. You know, it was a fairly popular race in the region, and that was before they dropped Ironman Tulsa on it. But it's like, you know, independent races offer a different experience. They're not all the same. If you do an Ironman, at least for me, I did Maryland and Chattanooga, it was the same experience. I mean, different courses, but it all felt the same. But every independent race, you know, they're all different. Sometimes they suck, sometimes they're cool, sometimes they're great. They're all different. And I'm one of these athletes that when I bought my first condo, the guy had a map on his wall of all the places he had traveled to. I'm like, I want to do that with a race map. So for me, you know, fulls, 70.3s, wherever I can go, I want a pin for the map. I don't care, you know. And most of them aren't, you know, I think there's like 170, maybe 50 to 170.3s out there that aren't Ironman. I'm like, yeah, I can go all these places and I don't care.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I'm with you. And I think the reason that, you know, I'm one of these people who desperately wants to believe that anybody could be doing what I do. And for the most part, that is true. But the experience that I create at my events is unique because it's me. I mean, any other race director, their events have their own unique experience as well. And the older I get and the more I do this, the more I realize that you have the ability to shape a feel of an event. And Ironman does it from a corporate standpoint. They do. The reason that all their events feel the same is the reason probably that all of my events feel the same. My events might feel differently than Jim Rainey's.
Personality.
Different. But you do have that ability to create that event or that feel of the event. And that's what Beach to Battleship had. Beach to Battleship had a very cool, progressive vibe, and it shined out in many different ways. And it shined out in the merchandise. It shined out in the awards. It was just constantly growing, and it had this energy that kind of built.
It's really easy to text putting B2B. Just send them.
Yeah, there's so many things about it that were awesome. And yeah, I think that thing that people who don't do what you do, who don't travel outside of their world, they don't get to experience that. And it's the same with any sort of travel. I mean, right? If you stay within the confines of Atlanta your whole life, you're going to have a different viewpoint as to what that life is like than someone who's going to spend some time in France and spend some time in St. Louis and spend some time in Qatar, anywhere. you open up your mind and you open up your ability to see things and experience things. And I think when you're seeing all these different events and seeing all the different feels, that is what makes the small events appealing. The problem is when you get too many of them, they can't sustain. There's just not enough people who are doing them, and the sport has seen a decline as well. We're not seeing as many young folks getting in, and we're trying desperately to figure out a way to make it attractive to young folks. But right now, it's just not happening. And to be quite honest, we're not seeing nearly as many minority athletes as we need to be seeing.
Yeah, that is true. I have this kind of thing in the back of my head when I race. I said, how many black people am I going to see on this course? And it's usually like, one, no more than 5, even in an Ironman.
And I don't know. I mean, there's obviously, I've talked to Rocky with the CEO of USAT about this. I've talked to several other people about it, and there's barriers to entry in the minority world, and we need to eliminate those barriers to entry. If they're economic, if they're, just the ability to be introduced, the immersion of the minority population to be even. I mean, you think about it. We're all, we've worked hard. We've done a great job, and we have money, and that's great. And not everyone does, and especially in the world of minority populations. Well,
I don't know if you've ever noticed, but I start with swim. I've been a swimmer my whole life. People who come from minorities or not, low socioeconomic places of living, never learn how to swim. So.
It's a real thing. And we can talk about that as a stereotype or whatever, but it's an actual real thing. And there's
it doesn't matter what what race you are. If you didn't grow up with a lot, the odds are you didn't probably learn to swim.
Correct. Yeah. Swimming is you really don't think about it until you really dive into it. No pun intended, but it is a very, you need access for membership fees, things of that nature. And that's why it's great to see things like the YMCAs, things like that, and supporting those in the local community are very, very important, because they do introduce all sorts of people, regardless of income, to things like swimming and other things they would never have anything to. But even with that, I think the main thing is probably that feeling of word of mouth that you talked about, that Beach to Battleship had. The sport needs to have more of that. We have a handful of African-American athletes who race with us, and they need to be able to go into their community and say, look, this is great, and I feel really welcome there, and you should come.
There's a tri club in Atlanta for black athletes. I've seen
Black people swim, bike, run is big, and we get a lot of. It's really interesting. We do a women's only series in North Carolina and South Carolina called Ramblin' Rose, and we work with a group called Try It for Life, and they're a national organization that helps women kind of get into the sport and kind of establish that empowerment through the
regular sausage fest. I mean,
yeah, right. And we see 30-40% minority at those events, and to me, it's like yes, and it's it's the women that are doing it, and so. We have to find a way to replicate that, and we have to find a way to really just increase the minority participation, because right now it is just dreadfully low. It's dreadfully low, and it's the older I get and the more I see the problems that are happening in the world, it's a problem for me, and I'm trying desperately to figure out a way to remedy it, and I haven't found it yet.
So, have you looked at the guidelines that USAT put out for race directors to put on what they call a safe race? How practical do you think they are? I looked at it and I saw dollar signs, a lot of them, and it's not like you're getting subsidized for them.
No, and I didn't really see a lot of substance there, and I understand what USAT is doing. I mean, the first thing that I think athletes need to understand is they're a governing body of the sport, and their number one issue is going to be insurance. I mean, that is their number one thing. And they're in the business of insuring events. They're in the business of insuring athletes. They're in the business of insuring themselves. And unfortunately, we live in the United States, and, litigation is a real possibility at every turn. We've dealt with it. USAT deals with it daily. So I think they had to put something out just because everyone expected them to. But ultimately, I read it and don't see a whole lot in there that is any difference of what you would normally expect in a situation like this. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is you would need to be a pretty terrible race director if any of that was something that you're like, oh, all of a sudden I know exactly how to put on an event in COVID-19. So there's some things in there that make sense, but ultimately it's a document that covers their butt and says, you know, look, we told these people that they needed to do these things. I mean, some of the things like having your lifeguards wear protective face covering. I mean, I'm not a lifeguard, but if I'm going to go save someone in the water, I don't want a mask. I mean, I guess you're not breathing underwater anyway, so if you had a mask on, what does it matter? But
I don't think it matters.
No, but I mean, it's just things like that. That's just, I don't know. I mean, it's a fine document, and the people who put it together did it well. The content is not anything that is earth-shattering or should be earth-shattering if you're paying attention to anything that's COVID-19 related. But again, it serves the purpose of putting something out there and making the public and athletes feel like we are doing something to protect. I think that's where we are right now, right? It's we're not racing because the public is ready for it. And once more people say we're ready for it, then we'll start doing it. But there's nothing as a race director you can do to stop the spread of a virus. I mean, you can do these things, but ultimately, I mean, short of saying we're putting up some bike racks, we're setting up some buoys, have at it at any time you want, there's nothing we can do to stop it. So we're holding tight. We don't have any events until right now, at least until mid-August. But there's no document, there's no precaution that you can take if, you know, someone's infected, multiple people are going to get infected. And so the big problem I have with the document is the level of emphasis it puts on testing people as a race director and your medical team. And I mean, temperature checks, and I feel like that's a slippery slope when it comes to race directing and putting yourself actually at risk. And that's one of the scariest things for me is I've got a medical team at an event, for example. Normally it's an ambulance, maybe a doctor or some EMTs, and you know, someone who's there to provide emergency aid. So, you know, if there is an emergency, obviously it can be taken care of immediately and then moved on to a hospital setting. Longer distance events, the more likely you are to have problems. You have a more robust medical team. But I mean, we're having problems testing people right now in the general public who have symptoms. And so to have such emphasis on testing or temperature checking or acquiring medical data from athletes as a race director, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And again, that's where the piece of this is really just intended to cover some insurance situation. It really starts to feel that way is because I'm not going to temperature check 400 people. So I'm just not going to do the event. And if someone's willing to do that or has the capacity or a hospital sponsor who's willing to do that, great. Go have at it. But I've been sued enough that is a scary place is once you start dealing with medical situations at a race.
How hard do you think it's going to be to get volunteers, man? How, you know, people are not as willing to do this now, I think.
Yeah, considering volunteers are for us at least, are usually from that high school set, and parents have to okay that. It's going to be hard. And so what I do think is going to happen, and what I do feel comfortable doing, is eventually getting to a point where, look, we're creating a skeleton for you as a triathlete. And we're not going to give you t-shirts. We're not going to give you awards. What we're going to do, in getting back to this idea of creating your own challenge, is we're going to create the ability for you to have that challenge with things that you don't have at your house. One, a body of water that you're permitted to swim in. Two, buoys that actually mark a distance that you know is an exact distance. Three, police at intersections so you can physically actually race rather than constantly look around. And
I've been in a race where they said the police might take off if they get a call. I go through a freeway on-ramp section. There's no cops in it.
yeah, I've been in I've been expert witness in a couple of situations where that happened, and that's bad news. So, so having that, creating that, and creating, aid stations where you don't necessarily have to carry water, but even that people are saying.
So you're going, it's like, I'm just going to give you the bare bones experience because that's really all we can feasibly give you right now.
Right. And then as a race director, you go, well, I'm not giving you anything. I feel a little, I mean, I understand I have costs and I have things to pay for, but it's like, how much do I charge you for that? And so, as a race director right now who is putting on some virtual challenges and things, the one thing that I am just amazed by is, I know that athletes are paying for these things simply so that we can feed ourselves, and because we have zero income. What's really interesting is this was, it's been a difficult thing. So I think one thing about being a race director is being nimble and being able to kind of pivot and, just survive different ways. And so as the downturn in the triathlon market, we've really worked on some running events and building that side of our business. And ultimately that is what keeps us afloat and keeps us able to put on triathlons. And now, we were hitting a situation where we took on some pretty significant debt to acquire some properties, race properties, so that we could continue to build the sport of triathlon, namely those women's events. And we were hitting that point in 2020, beginning of 2020. We're like, okay, this is starting to turn around for us and from a financial situation. And then this hit, and I was like, son of a, this is a challenge, a big challenge, because we went from, like I said, a really good place, probably the best place we've been in 10 years, to literally nothing, zero revenue. People aren't registering. Even if I have an event in October, why is anyone going to register for it? So what I have seen in the triathlon community is that those folks who race with us constantly are supporting us by doing these challenges and virtual things that we're doing in a big way. And it's humbling, to be quite honest, that I don't have anything to provide. As a race director, I provide races, and there are no races. So it's very humbling to see these.
Buy me a beer if you feel bad.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do that. A virtual beer, I can do that. But it's really humbling to see these people, support us, and basically is what a make-believe thing. But ultimately, you realize that a race so we're starting to try to figure out what is it that we provide on a normal basis that we're not providing virtually, that we can provide, and it will be dumbed down. It will be very, very, very basic what we do provide when we start coming back. But ultimately, as we do that, people will become more comfortable, and we can start providing more things. We get a handle on the virus, regardless of how you feel about it, whether it's real or not. People are dying from it, and no government entity is going to give us access to anything as long as people are concerned about it. So that's where we are. We're at the hands of the mercy of the government and these entities. And we had an event today in Sumter, South Carolina. Their event is scheduled for mid-September, and they had to make the decision to cancel. But they're a government entity. It's that's what's propelling these cancellations. It's not necessarily the race directors or anything like that. It's universities who are saying, you can't. We're not having anything on our campus. It's municipalities are saying we're not willing to take that risk, and that's where we are right now. So it's one of those things where we're holding tight and hoping to get back, but ultimately we really have no say, because we own no property. We own none of these lakes. We own none of these roads. We own nothing like that. And until I can find someone who has a private spot, ultimately, none of these guidelines really make a whole lot of sense, because people who own these properties, the states and things like that, are going to ultimately make an even more drastic decision than USAT ever would on whether or not to allow events. But I love USAT. I think they do a fantastic job. I've been with them since day one, and I'll stand by them still. They do a great job for the sport. But there's not a lot of meat in those guidelines that I saw that really made a difference. And so until governments become comfortable allowing people in close proximity, we're not going to have an event, because no state park is going to understand how you can have a race and still keep people 6 feet apart. That's what USAT probably is focusing on, but needs to focus on the most is not talking to the race directors and not talking to the athletes. They need to be talking to the municipalities and explaining to them how this is possible. And I hope they are. They don't consult with me very often on their decisions on how to, but that's where this needs to go, is the municipalities to understand what is safe and what isn't. And to be quite fair, none of us understand what's safe and what's not. There's just too much information out there right now.
Is there anything you want to know from the consumer? Eric Updike asked me questions for 45 minutes because he wanted to know what my thoughts were about a lot of things. Anything on your mind that you want to know from the triathlete?
We spend a lot of time looking at data of triathletes and trying to get the feel. And, we have a great group of triathletes here in South Carolina. I think the main thing that has always interested me in triathletes, and I kind of know the answer because I am or was a triathlete, and I've kind of touched about it today a little bit, but is why, or at what point does an event earn the credibility to say, okay, we're gonna go race that event in a longer distance? You've got a lot more time invested. I can certainly go knock out a sprint. I could do a sprint triathlon today with zero training. It'd be ugly. But I could go do it and invest, $70, and it's not a huge time suck or money suck, but I grasp the concept that when you start getting into that iron distance or half iron distance, even, you're talking 15, 20 hours a week for months on end. You're talking a lot of money. You're talking time off from work. You're talking hotels. You're talking thousands of dollars invested, in something like that. And you really you might do that twice a year. So it's a big deal. And for us as race directors, we need to figure out at what point, an event establishes itself as, that's on my list of things that I'm willing to consider, because we've put on half iron distance events with multiple groups, tough man included, and we are just not able to get over the hump of the number of athletes it takes to keep those events viable. At South Carolina half is formerly Tough Man South Carolina, and we're going to do it. And we lost $10,000 on that event last year. And I'm a small outfit. I'm not going to do that very often. And so I think what athletes need to understand, and what we're trying to understand from them, is if an event doesn't make money fast, at least within a couple of years, there's not many quality race event organizers who are going to stick with that. And so I think what we need to understand is what do we need to do to provide a situation where that event is going to happen quick. And so ultimately, I guess the question is why do you choose an event, and are you willing to kind of put a bit of trust into an event that is an early, along the line event, a young event, and what does it take? I feel like we've earned enough respect in the world of triathlon race production that we're going to put on a quality event. We're not going to cut corners where we can, and then we're also limited by budget. So if we're losing $10,000, you're probably not going to get a really cool $35 backpack with our logo embroidered on it or anything like that. You're going to get the bare bones. And this is where we have a problem, right? Is we don't want to charge an arm and a leg, but we could certainly charge $100 more and give you $35 worth of product, which I see a lot of the big companies doing. So that's ultimately, is it more gear? Is it more swag? Is it better location? Is it all of the above? I mean, it's all of the above, I know.
So actually, I'm in the minority here. Your 2015 Beach to Battleship was the first half Ironman distance that I signed up for. I didn't go straight to Ironman. Rev 3 Cedar Point was the first full distance I signed up for. And I did that because it's in Ohio, where I'm from. You know, Beach to Battleship was not too far from where my friends live in South Carolina. So I did it because I wanted someone around to see that I did it, you know, someone to cheer me on. And I picked it based on location rather than brand recognition. And so my first 3 races were actually not Ironmans.
Right. Yeah.
Not a lot of people do that, because when they start out, you know, somebody in your office, if they've heard of a triathlon, like, oh, you did an Ironman? That's what they know. And it's like, my first experience wasn't Ironman. So I had a totally different view of things when I started doing Ironmans. And then I realized how it's a photocopy, you know, it's just you're Xeroxing the race over and over again, same feel. And I remember when I talked to Eric Updike, because when they purchased his 3 races, they asked him to be the race director for them. And he said, Ironman's way of doing them is not Rev 3's way. So it's like, I'm flying the coop after 1 year.
We have a similar story there. Yeah, I mean, and now granted, you know, we weren't, you know, we were brought on. It was interesting, you know, when the purchase of, I keep want to call it BPD, Beach to Battleship. That's how trained I am about the sponsor name. But Beach to Battleship, you know, we were brought on to be race directors, and Mary Tofflon, who was actually my assistant race director, was brought on to be race director, and I was more or less a consultant. And they do things differently, for sure. And there is a much less personal aspect to their way of doing things. And it was hard. It was a hard realization. It's something that you built, something that you kind of cultivated, this kind of, not just event itself, but this mentality of caring, of openly caring and dealing one-on-one with athletes. And it was a really hard pill to swallow when you realize Ironman doesn't do it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, for independent races, this was your baby. You started it from nothing, you know, you've taken care of it. It's got your personality written all over it, where, you know, it's, Ironman is just something corporate.
Yeah, and ultimately, it was a good life lesson to learn that, you know, things don't last forever, and we'll still have those kind of memories of that event, and you know, but Ironman does it their way, and they paid for the right to do it their way, and ultimately, we had a decision to make whether or not it was worth the lots and lots of money they were offering to the YMCA to give up that right. And ultimately, we made the decision, which was the correct decision, to give up that right. And a lot more people in the Wilmington area have benefited from the money that the YMCA got from that purchase than ever would have otherwise. And so, you know, when I was having the conversation with Dick Jones about it, it's like, how do you, I mean, you're in the business of raising money so that you can provide services to people who need that service. And someone has come in and said, you know, we're willing to give you a whole lot of money so that you can continue on that mission for something that you've built and done a great job. And I don't see how you turn that down. And, you know, it's funny to hear the term sellout thrown around at you so much after that. It was like, it's interesting.
It's not sellout in the true sense, because if you didn't sell out, they were going to find somewhere to put one near you to squash you.
Yeah. Well, I always like to say, if we were selling out every year, we wouldn't have sold out. So
there you go.
And I guarantee, I looked it up, and it bothered me for a while. And I would look up people who would make that comment. I'm like, well, you never registered. I mean, you never ever registered, so you have no grounds to stand on. And eventually I just stopped caring. But, you know, when I lost my hair, I lost, you know, really my give a fuck about what people really think. But yeah, it's interesting. And there's this mindset that we want this independent network of races. And ultimately there's only a handful of people like you who support that. And so it's a big disconnect for us as race directors who hear this. And I think Rich Izzo, who started Tough Man, is in the same boat, is that, you know, he started Tough Man to be a legitimate alternative to Ironman and do it in a big way, but with small, I mean, he built a network of local race directors who work under this brand, and it's just not happening. And that's the hard part for us as race directors. And I don't want to, I'm certainly not singing a song of, you know, feel sorry for us as race directors, because ultimately my opinion of what we do is when someone comes in and can do it better, I'll go find something else to do. And so far, I've been able to earn a living and make an existence doing this for half my life, you know, 21 years, 22 years now. So we've at least been adequate. So I don't want folks to think that, you know, they should feel sorry for us because there's somebody out there who's better at making a whole lot of money doing this than we are. But it's just, we're not seeing the numbers come in through these events that we're creating to keep them going. And this is why they're dropping off. And we can blame that on Ironman's saturation of the market, but ultimately it's just people not wanting to race with us and choosing to race with Ironman in a more limited number of events that they're racing as well. I mean, you talked about it yourself. You've got 17 events on your calendar this year. I think the average triathlete races 4 times a year. So I think if you step that back in the timeline, maybe 10 years, that number has drastically gone down. We used to see people who would race 15 times a year a lot. Now it just doesn't happen. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I get it. And it's an expensive sport, and people are choosing less races, more destination races. And ultimately the market has to correct itself. It's happening now in a big way because of COVID-19. But Ironman will correct itself. Our events, even on a local level, will correct themselves. And we'll find this place that works for the number of triathletes that we have. And hopefully all of that time, we're working on building new triathletes and creating more passion about the sport, similar to what we had when it first joined the Olympics in the 2000s. And that's really the key to the sport is the athlete base and growing that, and not you know, raping the athlete base that we have now and making them, you know, just have to pay more and more and more because we're getting less and less and less athletes. So that's where we have to work toward.
Well, what I do see happening is the deeper the recession gets, the less people that are going to be doing Ironman events. Now, I don't know if that necessarily means, well, I'm going to find something cheaper to do, or I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, we've been through this before. We hit this, we've been through the recession. I don't remember the year because honestly, I try to stay off the TV and off the news and stay on to what we're doing. But with so much time on my hands, it's hard. But I know before there was another recession when the, you know, kind of the bubble burst. You hear all of that.
2008.
Housing crisis. And we saw a little bit of a dip. The good thing about what we do versus someone, say, in the bike manufacturing world or the running shoe. Well, the running shoe is a little different, but everybody who's a triathlete right now has what they need to be a triathlete. Now they might want a nicer bike, but ultimately you can't call yourself a triathlete if you're not doing triathlons. And the same for me is I'm not a triathlete anymore. I've done a lot of triathlons, but I'm not a triathlete. So if I wanted to be a triathlete, I would have to do races. And so people might not race as much, but they're still racing. And so we were pretty lucky during the last recession that it didn't really affect us much. And, you know, we talked about it before, but the base of people who race with us have, I mean, unlimited income, or not unlimited, but they're certainly not worried about, do I race this triathlon or give food to my kids? Luckily, most triathletes would choose the triathlon rather than the food for kids. But no, we don't see a big drop because of a recession. Because recessions usually happen right from the bottom up. The billionaires might.
Triathletes have more disposable income.
That's exactly right. I mean, we always use the term when we're trying to sell sponsorships. They're active, affluent achievers, and they have disposable income. And so, you might not buy a new bike, but you're still going to race. And I think that's where we are, luckily. But right now, you can't race. So it's a weird place for us that we've never seen before. And yeah, we're just holding on. I mean, that's what we're doing. And we're trying to be creative and come up with ways to do some things that kind of pique people's interest that they can do when they're training. But yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, I think, I don't know if Ironman will suffer as much as the smaller race directors, because Ironman has a bigger buffer, but they also have to answer to shareholders now and investors. And I like where I sit much better than where they sit, simply because I just don't want to deal with that headache that they have to deal with. But we'll see.
Well, man, thanks for giving me so much of your time today. I appreciate it. And if you ever bring back a full, let me be the first person you tell, because I'll gladly.
I will actually. If we bring back a full, I'll make this guarantee to you right now. You'll be the first one that I give a comp entry to. First.
Bring back another 70.3, though. I mean, I did Beast of Battleship and a Coney, man. I just found mine on Main Street too late. The year I found it was the year you canceled it.
Yeah, that was a crazy morning, man. It's so funny. I always tell the story, and this will be, I'll let you go after this, but I always tell the story of that morning and how challenging it must be to cancel a race on race morning, especially one that's 50 miles away from, I mean, you've got bikes and people don't have their cars. But I remember being in that command center and talking to Steve Pennington, who started that event, and saying, dude, everybody in that transition area is walking around, and you can look at them and they're just waiting for you to tell them to go home. They are triathletes. They will race no matter what you say, but everyone is waiting for you to tell them to go home, because no one wants to race in this. I was like, that should be the easiest decision ever. And at that point, because no one, as a race director, you think, at least I did, is you think, oh, well, there's bad weather, or there's somebody, right? There's some agency that's going to come in and say, you can't have this event. And it takes all the pressure off of you as a race director, right? To say, well, we don't have a choice. It's like now, these cancellations, it's like, I mean, it sucks. It's awful, but we don't have a choice. But you look around the room of all these agencies, and it's like, they're like, you tell us what to do. This is not how this is supposed to happen, right? You're the authority. And so as a race director, all of a sudden you're thinking, well, crap, this really is my decision. But that morning was super easy to make that decision, because you just walk around that transition area and everyone is like, I'm going to go because I'm a badass and I'm tough, but gosh darn it, I do not want to go. So that was a fun morning, an interesting morning, but it was not fun tearing all that stuff down in that ring.
Oh, I got one for you too, from last year. It was an independent 70.3 rock and roll man in Macon.
Yeah, I started that race with Jim Rainey. Love that. Yeah, love that race.
Well, it's not coming back. I talked to Jim a couple of days ago, but the half isn't coming back. But so when you see a hurricane coming, you've got plenty advance. Like, this was a tropical storm at the time, but it's not going to hit you immediately. And it's like, okay, it might impact the race. So 3 days before, I emailed him like, hey man, you gonna cancel this race? I mean, I live in Atlanta. It's only in Macon. It's not that far, but I didn't want to drive that far just to go to this race. The night before, I said, hey man, do I need to come down there or not? He's like, we're gonna wait till race morning. I'm like, shit. I said, you need a tropical storm.
Right. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, and that I love that race. I got some great memories of that race with Jim and his crew. That thing, and again, that's another testament to that race was huge at one point. I mean, we had 700 or 800 people at the biggest in the half there, and another 300 or 400 in the sprint. It was a big time event, and it just had that feel. And it was in Macon in June. I mean, it was so bloody hot. And I used to always make, and I know he moved it, which was a smart decision. But I used to make the joke that if you can finish in 4 hours and 10 minutes, that's the best, race that there is. But at 12:10 or 11:10, because we started at 7, 11:10, it's 100 degrees. So, like nobody can finish it in 4:10. But I think one guy did. But just it's fun to think back on these great events that we've been a part of, and it's now there's so many events that I've produced that have been great that are just no longer there, and it's just the nature of the business. And the more you do this, the more you realize that you can only ride the wave as long as that particular event calls for, and these things are ephemeral. And there's events out there that have gone on for 20 plus years, and those are rarities, and they mean a lot, and they're a lot of fun to do, and it's fun to kind of look at where we've gone with those events. But they're events, and ultimately it's interactions that we have with the athletes and our fellow racers, and ultimately make it. What I'm more impressed with is the athletes who have been there the entire time. We've got a handful of athletes who race with us in South Carolina: Jeff Brandenburg, Frankie Valley, guys like that, who Curtis Farmer, guys who've been around since I started racing in the 90s, and they're still racing. And that's a testament. Those are the kind of athletes that just blow me away. We're still out there doing it, and doing it well. Peter Cotlin, the first triathlete I ever met, an Ultraman winner, world record holder. He's still out there racing with us, chugging along in second, third place every week in these sprint distance events. It's mind blowing to me. So,
were you at Lake Logan this year?
What's that?
Were you at Lake Logan this year?
I was not. I was actually supposed to race it, but I didn't train.
You missed something very interesting. Now, on the run course, about 2 miles in, the local hillbillies, and now there's a difference between a hillbilly and a redneck. There is a difference.
Oh, for sure, 100%.
Started having target practice with their shotguns. I didn't know where they were, but for an hour long, you heard gunfire.
I'm sure that was on purpose to make sure that everyone heard it. But that's just a little hillbilly fun. I grew up in a country way of life, and that's the kind of thing that we probably would have if there was a bunch of men running down our street in Speedos too. So, yeah, it's weird. It's really interesting. But yeah, that's one thing that we find all the time.
I don't get that in Iron Man.
You do not, because Iron Man tries to stay within the city limits most of the time. But yeah, it's a clash of a whole bunch of different type of people putting on events, and it's one of the things that, and we found this out at Beach to Battleship as well, as we went into some very rural places on that bike course. I mean, it was 50 miles out there. So it's just dealing with people like that and understanding. And I think this is where we are in our political world right now, is that everyone thinks that they know everything, and everyone has they're looking through different lenses all the time. And what we have to do as race directors is we have to be able to step away from our point of view and get behind their point of view and say, okay, we understand where you're coming from, and what can we do to find a common ground here so that we can accomplish what we're trying to accomplish, and you can accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, even if what you're trying to accomplish is the most asinine thing that I've ever heard in my entire life. If you're worried that you're not going to be able to take your trash to the dump on Saturday because of this event, I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. But let me understand why. Is it because you only get a chance to go one day a week and whatever? I mean, but I think that's one of the best things that I've learned as a race director that's helped in life is to just see these people for who they are and what they are, and appreciate that, and appreciate the fact that they're probably just having a lot of fun with you guys, and just getting a little bit of joy out of seeing the hair on the, well, no hair because the triathletes shave everything, but a little bit of fear in your eyes, you run faster, and ultimately probably cause you to be a little bit faster that day. So we might bring that to every race.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for giving me so much of your time, man. It was a good conversation.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Thank you very much.